Uh, Sorry, hello?
Yes, sir. You're
Hi, brother.
perfectly
Yeah,
audible.
yeah, yeah. Give me a minute. 1 minute. Yeah, okay. Can we start off? Sorry, I'm sitting in the ministry, so just after the meeting, there's no
Yes,
time to get back to the office.
not an issue,
Ah,
sir.
sorry for the. I looks like I kept everyone waiting.
So
Yeah.
we we
So
we are actually announced. So if it's okay with you, I'll just give a brief introduction about
sure,
the
sure,
center and
sure,
and the
sure,
topic, and then I'll
sure,
hand
sure,
over the mic to you, sir.
sure, sure, sure.
Yeah. So good evening, sir. To you and to everyone who's present here. So first of all, I would like to thank you for accepting our invitation to come here and deliver a lecture. This session has been organized by Maharashtra National Law University's Center for World Affairs, which is just a little over 2 months old, but we have been able to organize uh, I mean, 4 lectures, and this will be the fifth lecture. So we are really proud of the progress that we have achieved in a short span of time. Uh, sir, again to you and to everyone who's new to this session. This center is basically a brainchild of a few international relations enthusiasts, and the need felt by those individuals to to come together and bring people of the same curiosity together in order to discuss the changing world order from the point of view of military, geopolitics, economy, etc. This is a slightly different initiative, certainly different from the conventional law centers that one would find in law schools and especially national universities. Um, and this center is still in its nascent stages, but we aspire to work hard and to grow the center in the coming months. A special mention has to go to Mr. Vinay Kumar, sir, the faculty coordinator of this center, who has been making every effort to invite and request eminent researchers and scholars. To sort of to come here and deliver lectures, including you, sir. Um, so in the last 4 lectures, we've been able to like geography wise, we've been able to cover the terrorism and the counter-terrorism efforts in the Southeast Asian countries, the region. We've also been able to cover the Afghanistan crisis, and that lecture was delivered by Major General Asthana. Next, we were also able to discuss the EU and the China's like the relationship between those two regions. And finally, from the Indian point of view, there was this one lecture that was conducted by Mr. Don McLean, which was sort of aimed at discussing India's vaccine methods policy. And this would be another interesting topic that we would be dealing with today, sir, which would deal with the military modernization and the indigenization efforts under the Make in India scheme. So before finally moving on to the main lecture, I would also like to thank our registrar sir and the vice chancellor sir and all the authorities of our university who have enabled our independent and smooth functioning of our center, and we are really grateful for their effort. Uh, Again, thanks a lot for accepting to come here and delivering a lecture, sir. For the participants and the audience, Mr. Dinkar Peri is a defense correspondent at the Hindu and a Chevening journalism fellow. So there would be a brief 15-minute question answer session at the end of the lecture after you've completed your presentation, and once that question answer session is over, we can wrap up the session, sir.
Sure, sounds
So
good.
I'll hand over the mic to you, sir. Thanks a lot
Sure,
once
sounds
again.
good. So yeah, on that note, thank you very much for having me here. And it's nice. I mean, we have been trying to work this for some time. Vinay has been patiently checking with me on and off, but for whatever, just something happening, it didn't work out. And even as I said, today also has been a bit of some delay. Apologies for that. Uh, so to just Papa, I'll not. What is the time? So it's 5:25. So I'll probably wind up in 15 minutes so that there is longer time for maybe if there are more questions we can happy to take them. That will be even better because there's something specific. It'll be easier to answer for me as well. So I'll just try and just give a broad canvas of how the thing system works. So just you get a sense of because otherwise each of it sometimes some things can become too technical. Say the procurement procedure per se. There's so many steps. I mean, each of the steps will be too technical, but just I'll try and my effort will be to just give you a sense so that you understand what it is and how it works. So if I can communicate that, I've been successful in this session. So just to start with. So just very briefly to touch upon the defense procurement procedure. So anything the armed forces buy, there's something called it was called the DPP, Defense Procurement Procedure. Last year it was renamed as the DAP, Defense Acquisition Procedure, and it's been now the procedure, a formal procedure has been there for almost 2 decades now, with different versions, improvements, trying to streamline, time, cut down the time, because defense procurements per se are a long gestation thing, because they're high value or high end platforms. Say for instance, you buy submarines or you say ships or tanks, etc., and so on and so forth. And there are also checks and balances. There's checks and balances in the system. So effectively, that I mean, there have been efforts. So it has its own. The procedure has its own plus and minuses. The point is there is a procedure to put a process to the whole thing, so that there is no oversight, there is no deviation, there is certain mechanism is followed, there is no corruption, etc., and so on. And so on. And there are various levels at which things are worked out. So, for instance, I'll just give a basic example and just try to give a thing of how the system functions. So, say the army wants to say procure tanks, for example. So they say, okay, we have they have old tanks. They want to replace them with the new ones. They're old, they want new generation tank. Fine. So then the first step is the army does an internal listing assessment of what exactly do they want. Something called the preliminary requirements, PSQRs as it's called, preliminary service quality requirements. They make it's essentially the specifications they would like to have. Which, because see, don't forget the equipment. I mean, generally, what is procured today might take 10 years to induct into your this thing, but then it has to remain technologically competitive and valid for the next 40 years, 50 years. So you have to think in that terms. So you'll have to build in that redundancy into your specifications. So that's one step. So that it begins with that iteration. Once the initial step, the service formulates something, they give out something called a EUA, expression of interest. So they essentially do a market survey, to put in a what do you call corporate parlance. Just check out what is available. See what, but the moon may not be available. You'll have to check out what is the next closest to the moon you can buy actually in the market, or who is ready to give you something. So that's one. So then they do an assessment. They say, okay, whoever is we need this. Please give us a just do just a general survey and find out what is there. That's EOI. There's something called they go to the government, the defense ministry. They ask for an initial permission, saying, okay, we would like to buy this. Please give an approval, and they put the case and saying why they need it, etc. So if the defense ministry deems fit, they say, okay, it's called the AON, acceptance of necessities. Okay, go ahead, do the process. You can, in principle, approval for buying the thing. That's the first step. Then they go check out. Then there's something called the RFI, request for information. It's sent to all the identify companies, which all can say your tank. Which all say there are 6 companies globally which can supply your tank. So they send it all and say, okay, if you have something of this, please give please respond what you have. See, not everyone will have exactly what we want, right? See, each country builds equipment for their own use. Our conditions are different. In fact, ours are more diverse. You operate in the mountains, you operate in the deserts, you operate in the sea and in the plains, so everywhere. So each company says, okay, we have this, what fits in. So then there is something called the next step is called, after the RFP or RFI, it's called the RFP, request for proposal. So that bring that once the responses come in, all the companies say, okay, have this. Now the services finalize exactly what they want. They know what is available. So from that, they pick and say, okay, this is what exactly we want. So that with that, they issue something called the RFP. So now that's when the procedurally uh, a certain milestone is crossed. When in fact, if you follow the news, usually there are two steps reported. There's something called A1 reported, there's something called RFI reported, and the RFP reported. So the RFP becomes in a way, a sacrosanct document. In the sense, once it's issued, you list out your provisions that cannot be modified. You say you want 3, 4, 5 ABC requirements. Then after that, you can't say, no, I don't want this, I want to change it. Then you have to redo the entire process again. So, and once the RFP is issued, a company responds to that and say they don't deliver that, they can be penalized for it. They are contract bound to deliver that. So that in the way is a sacrosanct thing. So once the RFP is given, companies respond, they give you, they put in their bids, whatever is as an offer, and then the a price that they're open formally. Then whoever is the lowest in a certain combination. Now, again, I'll just come to that in a minute. So it's open. They say, okay, they declare, okay, this fellow is the so and so is the lowest bidder, or qualifying this thing. The first they do a qualifying, who all qualify, and then among that the lowest. Fair enough. Now that then becomes the next step of the process is the contract negotiation, and now that can again be a tricky. It looks simple. So you have selected, so just negotiate and sign a deal. No, you're talking about defense equipment. You, the equipment you get has to be supported by the company for the next 40 years, because that fellow is so whoever makes it, because you can't do it. I mean, you can't do everything yourself. You need someone. So that's again that's a very, very, very tricky phase. But if you remember, for example, few years back, 2014, 2015, the earlier what was called the MMRCA, the Rafale, for the Rafale fighter jets, the deal was for 126. So 2000, in fact, what I was saying, the qualifying company was announced in 2012, but till 2015 they could not sign a deal. For 3 years they have been negotiating. So that's important, because part of the requirement was that they were supposed to build the fighters here in India by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. But that's where the problem was, because now the original company has to train this company, and then they have to meet the quality requirement, etc., etc. So there was a mismatch there. So again, when you say make in India, this is another aspect to it. One is the requirement saying you need it, but then the domestic industry being able to deliver it. Here in that case, the HAL, which was supposed to then at that point of time, they could not guarantee the same level of timelines or delivery, etc., as the original company. So the deal was never worked out. So eventually, after 3 years, the deal fell apart. And we know in 2014, the Prime Minister went, he announced the emergency procurement of 36 fighters, and the rest, what has happened. So that's a very, very, very important step. And once that happens, then you agree on a final price, then the file is put forward to the Defense Ministry, and if it's beyond a certain value, it goes to the Cabinet Committee on Security for the final clearance, saying, okay, the final price this much, the entire everything included, the final deal is put forward. Then once that clearance is given, you sign the deal, and then the delivery process starts. That's a different thing. So, but in a nutshell, this is what the process is. But it sounds simple, but as I give the example of the Rafale deal and the RFP, that contract negotiation, it can be a tricky process. It gets entangled many ways. In between, there are trials, equipment is tested, trial to check it meets your requirements. Many times the process goes back because someone is not compliant, does not comply to requirements, they don't perform, something else happens, some observation, someone raised a question, the entire process goes back. There have been the issues where the same process happened 3-4 times, but still have not been able to buy the thing. So that's what, in a way, many times affects your modernization process. So when you keep seeing the modernization delays, when you keep reading, this is what it is. It gets stuck, or sometimes it went for so long. Finally, the services realize, oh, now there's something better available in the market. The specifications are too old, so they scrap that. They start formulating the requirements again. So you're starting from zero again. So that's a pitfalls. I mean, the procedure is there, but you know there are the issues. So that's it. Now, just coming to the broader, putting this process into the broader, what do you call, the modernization context of the larger modernization. So yeah, technically speaking, from the domestic ecosystem, just again to uh, state facts, you have your ordnance factory board, about 41 factories in that, and in fact, just a few months back, the ordnance factory board was scrapped as part of a reform process, and it was converted into 7 defense public sector undertakings. Let's say, like, for example, DPSU is essentially a PSU, like your any PSU, but under the MOD and the Ministry of Defense. And for example, your BEL or BEML or your so many other, I mean, out on names. So, but yeah, so they're coming into 7 DPSUs based on the specialization so far, and we'll see how far how significantly improve the performance. That's for us to wait and watch. So that's one. So OFB is an important constituent because many of the things, say for instance, your ammunition and stuff, you're not supposed to import unless it's not available. It's very niche, or it's only available with some company. You're not supposed to. Then your fallback is your ordnance factory board, which normally makes the. So there have been traditionally been quality issues, efficiency issues, have delivery issues, and so many other things. Then you have your, as I said, the DPSUs as it is. Your Midhani, BEL, BML, and others. HAL, in fact, HAL one of the biggest ones, and so on. They are the DPSUs, which makes specialized equipment, verticals and equipment on different verticals. They are one. Then you have your DRDO, which is a network about 50 odd laboratories, around that number, which develop products, and then technology is given to the DPSOs who make the products. And increasingly now, in fact, as part of the uh, reform process to promote Make in India, as well as to improve the domestic industry, these products, I mean, many of the DRDO technologies are being used in the private sector as well for manufacture, from small to big, at different level. That is happening. So that again should improve eventually, till again some time away. But yes, it's an important step in that sense. So that's one. So this is broadly your domestic ecosystem. Your ordnance factories, DPSUs, then your DRDO R&D, and then there is a private industry which is now picking up. Say in the last 5 years, there has been considerable improvement, which we have a long way to go in since build a truly domestic defense industrial ecosystem. But yeah, there are a few companies here like your L&T or your Tata. They have been there for a long time in Mahindra and so on and so forth. And there is a whole network of, as well as a MSME base, which does important work, because they are the ones which build some of the niche technology. Small one, I mean, they will specific technologies, but they build very niche and critical technologies. Actually, come from the MSMEs. So they are an important part of the ecosystem, very important part of the ecosystem. So that's broadly your domestic ecosystem, what is there in the defense front. So this is where now the effort is to reduce your imports, because we have been traditionally importing. I mean, we even now, over 60% of your military hardware is imported. More than that, probably. It remains imported. But that's changing, slowly changing. And we have been license building again to make a distinction. There is a misnomer saying license building is technology transfer. No, not really. See, we have been license building, say, Russian equipment for decades. The last 3, 4, 5 decades, in fact. So 70s, 60s, 70s. All your MiG aircraft, Sukhois, your tanks, whatnot. But still, you have been not, I mean, it's only now, but still, what do you call, our indigenous development of all these has been more recent. If really your technology transfer had worked then, was if license building was technology transfer, we should have been selling them to the world, not buying them from outside. So just put a thing in context, which is many a times misunderstood. License production is a misunderstood term, and that's where again indigenization. I mean, again to flag one this thing important thing. We get stuck on indigenization content. I mean, for example, we say a ship or a tank. We say, oh, it's 70% indigenous, which means 30% is imported. That sounds fancy to say, or we keep quoting, oh no, previously it was 50%, now it's 70%. Yeah, it is, so to speak, an important step, no doubt. It's an incremental step, important. But what we miss out is, sometimes we say, oh, it's 80%, but not realizing in many cases that the 20% is the most critical technology which we are actually importing. So, for instance, your fighter aircraft, the engine is imported. The onboard, say, for instance, the onboard chip is imported. The missiles are imported. So then the aircraft is as good as, I mean, if that's removed, your platform is useless. I mean, to be realistic, to put in a realistic assessment. So when you say indigenous content, and it's not always a rosy or a fancy thing to say, oh, we have right, the more indigenous content is not exactly a yardstick for your military modernization. That's a misnomer, which tends to get lost many a time. You have to actually break it down and see what is the critical technology you make. For
The
instance,
assessment should be quantitative and not qualitative.
exactly. So
Or,
many times
or, or the other way around, qualitative, not quantitative.
it's a mix and match. So we shouldn't actually get short. We shouldn't get lost in one thing. I mean, many a
Correct.
times, and quite more often than not, we actually get stuck on the indigenization. I mean, we keep trying to see or put things in context, but in a larger narrative, it gets lost anytime. You say, oh, indigenous content. That's not exactly, that's a dicey parameter to go by, yardstick
Right.
to go by. So that's one, that again is again changing. So, for example, uh, how the domestic industry is faring. So just industry and domestic development, industry, etc. In the last a decade or so, there has been quite a bit of emphasis on shifting from imported to domestic. It's again a mixed bag, I would say. For example, why do I call it a mixed bag? There has been developments in some sectors, but not all the sectors. Why? For example, take your biggest platforms. I mean, recently we bought the Rafale, we bought T-90 tanks from Russia, we bought S-400 air defense systems from Russia, which are just coming into the country, and your early warning aircraft, transport aircraft, for example, your C-130, C-17, the strategic airlifting aircraft of the Indian Air Force, they have been imported. So we still rely on one of the biggest and the important platforms on imports. But that said, uh, what has been the impetus in terms of progress in terms of the domestic industry? For example, take helicopters. Helicopters is actually a good example of how a positive development in that sense. HAL builds a series of helicopters, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. So they have this advanced light helicopter, which is called a Dhruv. That is the first. I mean, the first Dhruv was built about 15 and 20 years back, early 2000s. They came with a Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3. So now, there were issues. Mark 1 there are too many issues. But then they improved. Once they gave it to the army, they also gave their feedback, so it improved. When they built a Mark 2, they corrected some of them. But again, there was more issues were identified. So they built a Mark 3. So now there are Mark 3 and there's a Mark 4. And Mark 3 and Mark 4 are probably the best in their class globally. They can compete with of their that category. It's a what do you call a utility, a twin engine utility helicopter, advanced ALH. So in its class, it can compete with the helicopters globally. So we actually see we have that's a see it takes a that curve to go through. You can't do this overnight. It takes time, and that's something which we have learned. HAL has learned through the ALH program, and now because ALH has stabilized as a platform, they've actually there's an offset, there's spin-offs using that experience under that platform, the basic platform as a benchmark. They built the light combat helicopter, which again has come up really well, and it's something which actually meets our conditions because there is no helicopter in the world, combat helicopter, which fully meets our requirements. Even the Apaches which we got from the US, say for instance, they can only operate up to 15,000 feet, about 14, 15,000 feet. Beyond that, they can't. But our actual requirement goes beyond that on Siachen. We need up to 18, 19,000 as well. So LCH, the light combat helicopter, can go up to 6,500 meters with decent load. See, there's always trade-off. The helicopter might go, but then it will not have any combat payload to carry. So then what's the point of having the helicopter there? So you need some amount of combination. So LCH addresses that. So it's built for our conditions by us. So you have control over it. So there's also a light utility helicopter, which is again come off as a spin-off. So now that will fit you keep these Cheetah and Chetaks flying still, which are 40, 50 years old now. We're the only country which still flies them. So this LUH is supposed to replace that, and it's an advanced stage. Probably it was just handover last month. In fact, formally to the services, they'll start inducting them a year or so. So eventually it will replace. And again, so that's an important area. Say for instance, you need helicopter requirement, just to put things in context. So the armed forces require about 400 light helicopters in the category of your Cheetah Chetaks. About 400, 4 to 500. And I'm just talking about one class of helicopters, not entire helicopter requirement. So if you look at put this 3-4 helicopters in it actually feels now the domestic requirement in most classes can be taken care of. Others are under development, so probably in the next 4 or 5 years we'll have solution options and solutions for a couple of other classes as well. So that's a very important development, and similar efforts are also going on, say, in other domains. For instance, your LCA has like combat aircraft Aegis. There were issues. It took time, 2 decades. A lot of money spent and so on. But the last few years, again, there has been some good progress. The first Mark 1 is inducted. 24 aircraft have been inducted so far of the 40. So early this year, we signed a deal for the IAF signed a deal for 83 Mark 1A of the LCA, which is a more capable, which puts in quite a few addresses quite a few requirements of the Air Force, which they said they want certain requirements as a basic platform. It takes care of all of that, the 83 aircraft. So that can kind of again take the indigenous fighter program to by a certain benchmark. It'll go up. And now there's also LCA Mark II already on the drawing board. I mean, they should the first flight is expected in 23. That's what they say. So a little maybe possibly there'll be a slight delay, but yeah, overall that will kind of. Then there's also the AMCA, something called the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, which will be an indigenous 5th generation stealth fighter aircraft, like your F-35 and equivalent. So that's again going to be an important milestone. So your experience LCA and the recent that technology curve that we went through. I mean, it took time, but that this will be invaluable there. So these are the key transitions that are happening right now, and as we speak, we're actually going through that. And similarly, in terms of say quite a few areas of missiles, for instance, say your Astra air-to-air missile has come up fairly well, and Air Force after some issues again, Air Force is quite happy with the product. There's a Mark II again development, which will be a improved range, improved accuracy, and a better one. So that's already underway. And DRDO again recently tested a few upgraded Pinaka multi-barrel rocket launchers, for example. I'm just trying to give few key weapon system areas which to say that there is now impetus for your indigenous push. Like I said, helicopters, fighters, say missiles. There's a rocket launchers, which is you might have seen on TV and all the videos which show up those multiple rockets being fired in succession in a tube from tubes. That's called the multi-barrel rocket launch system. So originally we have the Russian system called the Smerch, and there is also older Russian system much before that. Smerch is a longer one, which is about 90 kilometers plus, 90 odd kilometers. That's the longest in the inventory. So the next in the last decade or so, there was a Pinaka, which was again built by DRDO, which is about 40 odd kilometers. Now DRDO has come up with a Pinaka extended range, which guided Piraga, that couple of variants in that. But eventually, the range will go to 75 kilometers and plus. So that segment, because just again for for a better appreciation of the situation, your Smerch rockets, for example, they are very expensive. They're imported from Russia, and you really can't do anything with them, and the rockets are very expensive. Then don't forget, I mean, just again to emphasize the fact, every missile, every rocket, every bomb, everything, even this thing has a shelf life. They say, I mean, it can be say anywhere, say it can be 20 years, it can be 30 years, it can be 40 years. Depends. I mean, each one has their own thing. But after that, you have to, even if you don't use them, you have to replace them. They're unstable, you can't keep them in your inventory. You have to throw them out. As simple as that, you have to throw them out. Either do trials, do that. Some of them are upgraded, refurbished, all that happens. But after a certain point, you cannot. You'll have to dismantle them, dispose them off, which means you have to replace them. So that's also additional cost. It's not about the system, it's about the maintenance. So that's actually longer cost, by the way. You actually look at defense purchases. It's not about the one-time cost. It's not like buying a car is probably much simpler to put it. Here you're talking about military platform which have a much higher wear and tear and usage in utility as well. So this cost actually goes up. Your maintenance cost goes up than your actual one-time acquisition cost. In fact, that's when now increasingly in your procurements, again, going back to the procurement in general, something called life cycle assessment. So they factor in, they count your, not just a one-time cost of the, say, an aircraft, not just one-time cost. They also factor in your maintenance cost, say, for, see, each hour of flying of an aircraft costs a few $1,000s. A single engine, a few thousand, twin engine aircraft, probably double that of a single engine aircraft. So it's an expensive proposition. So now increasingly in defense deals, that is also factored in, so that you have a more realistic assessment of having that equipment in service in your inventory for the next, say, 30 years or 40 years, as for the lifetime of this thing in service. So that gives you a better calculation, better appreciation of the real cost of that equipment, and so that you can also negotiate with the company in a better way. Get support, maintenance, upgrade. Every equipment goes for an upgrade after, say, 2 decades. Generally, they're upgraded. And there's also, apart from that, there is also something called refits, upgrade, overhauls, and so on, which happen time like you're servicing your car. That happens. So they are all factored in. I mean, increasingly factored in different ways. So now, I hope I've made some sense with the indigenous versus import thing. Now, just to put a few things in that, add a policy framework in that. So in the last few years, there has been a lot of emphasis on giving incentives for indigenization as well as increasing exports. I'll just list out a few key parameters on that. So one of the key things was, say for instance, the last 2 years, more so. So the government came out with 2 lists of military items, which they said, okay, now these are available in the country by either domestic or private, whatever. Good one, a decent equipment is available. So they said, these cannot be imported anymore. These things have to be only purchased from the domestic sector. So in the first set, they gave out a list of 108 items. The second list which came out, they gave a list of 101 items. So together 209 items. Initially, it was called the negative import list. Now they renamed it as the positive indigenization list. So effectively these notified items, 209, the 3 services, the armed forces can only buy them from the Indian industry. DPSU or private, whatever, that's a different thing. And they also gave a timeline for that. Some of them it can't be done tonight, but they said, okay, 4 years, you have to do this. After this, they'll go into the list. You can't import them. So that's, in a way, an incentive for the industry as well to, get into the defense space in a bigger way on bigger items. Because please remember that defense is a monopoly. There's only one buyer, the government. So that changes the equations in a big way. And many times for the industry, for instance, we touch upon why is there a hesitation from the industry, to invest in a big way. Like, after all, the industries everywhere in your corporate sector, say from your cars to vehicles or something else. Industries everywhere. I mean, they're the ones who lead the thing. Why not in defense? Because it's a monopsony. Your requirement is only so much. Say, I mean, India's armed forces are a big number, but still, say for instance, for a company to develop, say, a tank again, to develop a tank, test it, trial it, meet a certain requirement, and then build them. Say the army says we want 500 tanks. For the company, the R&D is an expensive proposition in defense. For a company to build it, test it, do it, and then just build just 500 for the army may not be a workable proposition. 500 seems like a big number, but to maintain an entire ecosystem over it may not be. So the incentive to look for exports. Say for instance, that's what all your global manufacturers do. For instance, F-16. The US has it's one of the most successful aircraft in military history ever, along with the MiG-21 in terms of numbers. I think MiG-21 is the largest aircraft to be ever built in sheer numbers. But F-16 was the most successful, still in service across the globe, with many air forces. So it's not just the US Air Force. US Air Force requires several hundred of them. But then globally they sold a few thousand. So that averages out your R&D costs, unit costs, which brings us the cost for everyone. So that's something. So it's not, when you say developing industry, it's not just when you say why is the emphasis on exports, because that will bring down your overall costs as well. It'll catalyze the whole industry in many ways. So yeah, it's when we have a long way to go compared to say your US or France or Russia, but yeah, we are embarking on that now. So it's a very tricky balance. So as part of that, I was saying some of the measures. So in the defense budget as well, 70% of the about 70,000 crores. So again, just one line for understanding. So the defense budget, which is announced every year in the union budget, there's a overall budget. So it has different components. So one is the defense pensions, which is again a big chunk of almost 100,000 crores rupees. Putting that aside, so the remaining budget last year was about 3.5 lakh crores or 3.7 lakh crores, if I remember correctly, other than the pensions. So that again has two components. One is called the capital allocation. One is the revenue component. So what is the capital component? Capital is your amount for new purchases. So again, to be clear, new purchases doesn't mean you have the entire amount. Say you have 100 rupees for capital, doesn't mean you can buy 100 rupees for new things. Please also remember you are buying stuff every year. Say, and the payments are done over several years. Say when you sign the deal, about 10% is paid. Then when the next year you pay another, say 5%. When the first delivery begins, say after 3 years or 4 years, you pay another 10%. So the deliveries are spread over 10 to 15 years. Say for a fighter aircraft, it will probably go to 15, 20 years even. So every year you have, so when you say a deal is, say, Rafale deal, 60,000 crores, it's not that 60,000 crores was paid in one go. When the deal was signed, about 6,000 crores was paid as a one-time cost when the deal was signed. But the remaining payments are actually staggered over the next, say, 15 years. So when you say budget, that is essentially installments. These are lined up. You have to, from that 100 rupees of your capital allocation, you have to cater to those installments as well. And similarly, you have several other deals done over the years. Imagine the last 10 years, 15 years deals done, big deals. So you're still paying for them today, as on today. So all that has to be also calculated. So what is left after that, say 60 rupees, say 40 rupees or 50 rupees goes away in your committed liability. That's called the committed liabilities or your installments in a simple language. That's the actual money you have for new procurements entirely. So the capital doesn't mean entirely. So you have to differentiate committed liabilities from that. And the revenue is for your running expenses. You have to maintain your equipment. You buy ammunition, you buy oil, you buy lubricants, you have to pay maintenance charges, you pay annual support service, all that. Rations, etc., everything. That goes into the revenue stream. So there are two components to the budget. So last year, what the government did was they said 70% of your capital allocation will be reserved for the domestic industry. 70,000, not 70%, 70,000 crores, or about 63% of this year's budget. They said will be reserved for the industry, in sense procurement from the Indian industry alone. So what of that person has can be utilized only for procurements from the domestic sources. So that's again to catalyze the industry. Some of the measures which have been taken, and alongside they also kind of simplified the licensing mechanism for your exports. So obviously defense is a more sensitive area. So there are obviously requirements on the kind of equipment you sell. Areas, say ammunition might have a different thing, or missile might have more stringent. Drones or UAVs will have even more stringent requirements. So they have classified them, and then now they are also engaging, say, friendly countries. We have our our embassies are in most countries. So there are defense attaché, defense military officers posted in the embassies. They're called defense advisors or defense attaches. So they also been given a mandate to showcase what domestic equipment we have. So that, see, as the simple saying, "Jo dikta hai wo bikta hai." For someone should know what they have, right? For them to even come to you and say, "Okay, tell us about it, or we want to buy this." They should know what is there and what is its capability. So this is an important step to actually go and showcase. So now that a lot of effort is going on into that, so there a whole series of measures have been announced in the last 2-3 years. Again, a few years, 2-3 years, there's been some push. And a new policy, also export promotion policy, is also in the offing. The draft is already out for discussion. So probably, hopefully early next year, it should be finalized. So it'll again kind of streamline your exports and policies, so that, because that will also give you your impetus. So a company, when you say private sector should come in, now they also know that they can export as well. They can showcase this elsewhere as well. So that will also give them incentive to invest more, or come into the defense in a bigger way. So this is broadly the ecosystem, and yeah, it's already 6, so I'll just stop here. Any questions? I just was trying to give an idea, not too much technical stuff, but just lay a canvas for you to just understand the broad contours of it. So I hope it was useful. Any questions? Happy to.
Sir, I have two questions, sir. The first is the IF currently has around 30 squadrons of
32,
fighters,
32, yeah, yeah,
32,
31, 32. Yeah, it's
yeah,
fluctuating.
and we actually need around 42 or 43, and the projection is such that by the time we reach that number, the need would be even higher. So, uh,
No, see, there is not, the need won't go up. The sanction strength is 42
right,
squadrons, and that will remain the same. There is no, it's been done after factoring in all your threats and assessments. So
right,
that will remain there. That will not, the number will not change. But yes, you're right. It's about around 32, and it might change depending on few aircraft added, and that keeps changing
right,
broadly. But yeah, you are around, and unlike by the end of this decade, we are in 21. So even by 30, will not reach 42.
right,
It's tough. So probably at the rate at which we are, by by early next decade or middle of next decade, if we reach there, it will be a big thing. But
right,
yeah, but there are always, it's not, well, that's the ideal number, desired number, but it's always, what do you call, uh, it's not an absolute thing, so
hmm,
to speak. Fighter aircraft is one requirement. There are also force multipliers. There are also, say, for instance, it's not just the entire Air Force, depending only on your fighter aircraft. They
right,
also have air defenses. They also have other force multipliers, which will kind of offset the requirement of these, but in a certain way. Again, it's not one thing can't entirely replace the other, but yeah, it will
right,
offset. So that's factored in. So a lot of upgrades are on. When while the procurements are delayed, a lot of many of them are being upgraded. Some other measures being taken. Supplementary measures being taken to offset that.
right. And so the next question is about the AMCA program, the fifth generation aircrafts that so the projected date of the prototype rolling out is 2026, and on the other hand, US has already, I mean, US is, I think, a couple of years away from rolling out their sixth generation
That's
aircraft. And even Rafael is, I think, 4.5,
yeah.
like four and a half generation, which is also not ours. So, I mean, from the aircraft point of view, and from the fighters that we have, uh, the I mean, the quality is not really up to the mark, or we are way behind where we should be.
Mm, you, I agree point, but not entirely. Not entirely. See, the thing is, when I say the US fifth generation, see, they have started 2 decades back.
Right.
We started, see, with 2020, if we actually, when you say 26 years, you're right. But if you actually roll it out by 26, that's very ambitious. We have
Hmm.
actually done it faster than any other country because we only started a few years back.
Right.
The US has been doing it for 25 years now. In fact, their F-22 came like 2 decades. In fact, F-22 came into service about 2 decades back. F-35 began around then.
Yeah.
It's being invested now
Hmm.
for the delays. So if 26 actually AMCA is out, even if say adding a few years by even 30, the prototypes start rolling and doing tests, undergoing tests. That's a very ambitious thing. Very, very ambitious thing. And that will be a record of sorts if we actually make it.
Right.
So, and that said, see, apart from the US, no other country as of now has an operational uh, or other fifth generation aircraft fielded. And stealth is again relative. It's not an absolute term. There's nothing like, okay, you put this, it becomes stealth.
Right.
There's nothing like that. Stealth is a relative term. It is again, it gets misconstrued again quite a few times. So if you're building something, if you build an aircraft, with
Yeah.
you put in some special coating, or it absorbs this thing. So the other fellow is
Right.
also building something like right. So they also the other fellow, opposite fellow is also improving his radar.
Correct.
You are trying to reduce the cross section as they call it in the radar. Instead of the full aircraft being visible, full aircraft like this, you say okay, it will only be visible like this, or it will be visible like this, or just in a
Hmm.
small line, so that you can confuse the ground. You won't give a idea of what is it.
Yeah.
That's a no. It's always the fight that goes on. As you improve, he's also improving his this to counter this thing. As we are
Correct.
improving our counter capabilities to detect the adversaries, what do you call aircraft, for example. So it's a catch and mouse game. I mean, it will always go on. And stealth is a
Hmm.
relative term, not an absolute term. There's nothing called absolute stealth. It doesn't exist. And sixth generation is, I think, is sometime away. Yeah, they are working on it definitely, but not a few years. It's going to take some time.
Right. So there's one question by one of the participants. So he's asking, will India purchase S-400 air missile system from India? If you give some details with regards to that, that would
S4
be
is
great.
already inducted. It's already arriving in India now. We signed the deal 3 years back. The S400 deal was signed in 2018. The deal value was $5.34 billion for 5 regiments of S400. The deliveries, in fact, as we speak, the first deliveries are actually happening. The first shipments of S400 have arrived in India as we speak.
Okay.
So by in the next few months, the first set of S400 units will be operationalized.
I see.
The first
Okay.
unit is being deployed in Punjab, so they'll be operationalized in the further. They'll cut the deliveries will happen for the next couple of years, but yeah, it's happening as we speak.
Right. Okay. Sir Anand also has a question. He's asking, apart from big names in Indian private defense sector like Tata and L&T, who have the global presence, and do you see any other private companies jumping in this global space of defense?
So now there are, see, even among the big companies, if you say big ones, there are quite a few companies, in fact, not just Tata and L&T. I mean, for instance, Bharat Forge has come up in a big way in the last many years, or Adani is investing in a big one. They've bought a lot of companies. So they're not developed inherently, but they bought a lot of companies.
Right. And
That's
is
what
the
happened. And
government incentivizing the private industry
yes,
to
see, some of
compete
the things,
globally?
yes, some of the things I've said was that, what I said is reserving this thing for them, or, all this negative import list and etc. All the, simplification of procedures and all that is that. And see, as I said, beyond other than the big companies, the MSME is a very, very important space. some of the niche technologies come from them, but they are there. Once it comes, then they're acquired by some big company
Right.
quite a few times. So they play a very, very important role, and there's a lot of effort. For instance, in technologies like your farm drones, all the effort is, in fact, a lot of effort is happening from the MSME sector.
Right.
In the last few months, a couple of companies have demonstrated this capability, and now that some of the contracts have been awarded recently by Army and Air Force as well. So that way, yes, the private sector is coming up, and MSME is a very, very, very important space. Not just the
Right.
big ones.